Hi, I'm Felicia Johnson. I'm here with Miss Melody Boyd, and we're going to. Miss Boyd grew up in Nederland, Texas, where she didn't have. There were no black people where she grew up. So we're going to talk about that a little bit and go from there and keep going. Hi, Miss Boyd.
Hello, Miss Johnson.
You grew up in Nederland. Tell me a little bit about that.
Nederland is basically a very blue collar town. It's between Beaumont and Port Arthur, and the blacks either lived in Beaumont or Port Arthur. They never lived in Nederland. It just they just weren't there. My dad had a business in Port Arthur, and he had um, black men that worked for him, and there was a black lady who worked for my mother in the house. So I was around them. But other than that, or when I'd go to my grandmother's in Louisiana, then the same thing. She had a black lady that worked for her. So, but as far as being around blacks that were my age, no, never. It just wasn't the way it.
So when you left there, and or you,
When I
of
went,
course, you don't live there now. So when you left there and go to college,
yes,
you go to.
I went to Sam for about 3 months. That wasn't where I wanted to be, and I finally convinced my dad to let me go to A&M. And there were blacks at A&M, but they were athletes. And so, being an education major, there was a few in our classes, but they pretty much, the athletes stayed to themselves. The basketball players in the spring, we got to know them because they depended on us to do a whole lot of their work because they were gone so much.
Okay.
They would, can you help me out? So, but as far as girls or, there were, yes, there were girl athletes, but
So
they
this is during a time of, just to clarify, this is during a time of desegregation when they were starting to integrate schools, and so there's just not, and this is A&M Texas, so there's not very many black people going, not being, not even really applying.
Right. Most of the black students that wanted to go to A&M went to Prairie View. They didn't go to, and this was the early 70s.
Right.
So it was just not, there weren't many girls at A&M.
Well, so now I want to go back to something you said about having to do the boys' work. Did that bother you?
No.
Was that something
No,
you were paid to do, or just, and not trying to incriminate A&M, but just something y'all did for them just because you want the team to be the best? And
we, it was usually, these big projects that you had to, education majors always had projects that had to be done, and they would get in a bind because they would be out of town so much, and they were like, help, and they would provide a lot of the stuff they needed for their projects. Like they had done the research and they had done this or, stuff, and then we just throw it all together. And they didn't really take too much advantage of you, but you understood that the basketball players had a harder time, well, in the track, because they were gone so much. Football players.
now, was this for all the players or just the black players?
It was all of them.
All of them.
All
so
of them.
It wasn't like
white
we
players.
Wasn't necessarily creating a stereotype as we had to do in order to keep the black players eligible.
No.
We had to do their work. It was just kind of a jock syndrome.
Right. We had at A&M. You had players from the Caribbean. They were from everywhere. So it was not just the black players. I should have prefaced that.
Well, that's just something. So that didn't form any type of or I should say, did it for them, any type of ideas that maybe black people needed more help than others,
No.
and they couldn't cut it at A&M because of being black or the difference in color.
No.
So that make a difference. When you got through with college, and you're done with college and moving, and I'm assuming you
I got married.
got married.
As soon as I got out of college, my husband was still at school, and I started teaching in her. North of Bryan. Culture shock. Ooh, it was unbelievable. The majority of the town was black. The school I taught at was an elementary school, but it had been the old black high school. And it was in the predominantly black area of town. And it was just, it blew my mind because I had never been around that many, like most of the teachers were black. And they were so nice, and they knew, they pegged me just real quick.
So they received you well.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't. Oh, we're not. They didn't.
No.
Excommunicate
No.
you or
No.
not include you in the activities. So they just they received you well. And
They were very nice, and we what did me in was, like, the school was not air conditioned, and it was one of these that all the rooms opened to a sidewalk outside. And the principal told me, if you want an air conditioner, you have to pay for your own air conditioner. And he said, and when you put it in, you chain it, because it won't be there. They put 6 air conditioners in his office that year because it would get stolen. That he'd have it chain locked and everything, and they'd cut it loose and take it out of there. And of course, you know, we were poor students. We couldn't afford an air conditioner. And if your windows got knocked out, they just replaced it with plywood. It was just, one day a little girl got in a fight with another little girl on the playground, and she lived across the street from the playground. She went home. Nobody noticed that she took off and went home. She came back, and she was in this other little girl's face, and one of the other white teachers walked over to separate them, and all of a sudden I saw this white teacher's eyes were just huge, and I looked, and the little girl had a butcher knife, and she was fixing to, and the PE coach happened to be out there, and he was a big guy, and he grabbed her from around the back and squeezed her until she let go of that knife.
now, do you think your experiences at Hearn and being young, fresh out of college, newly married, you said your husband's still in college, and so that meant separation somewhat, time. Now, being there at the college, being at the school with predominantly black people, teachers, professionals, kids, had you had any pre-thoughts about what type of black people, or how black people were, how they acted, how they interacted with each other, their professionalism before you start working at Hearn, and if so, did that dispel any of the ideas that you already had?
I was clueless because doing student teaching in College Station, you still were not around black people, so it was like a whole new world.
So before you started working with the black people, you didn't really have any ideas, any thoughts about black people in your mind, or where they come from, what their cultural differences were,
The only
their
thing
work ethic.
Well, the only thing I knew was from what I knew growing up. Leanna came to the house once or twice a week, whatever mother needed her for. It's like I told y'all at school the other day, she smoked a cigar. Mother wouldn't let her smoke the cigar in the house. And I didn't know anything. She was just,
Well, I'm gonna dig a little deeper.
okay.
If the black you when you were growing up in Nederland, and you talked about your grandmother grew up in Louisiana, and black people worked for your parents, they worked for your grandparents. So the black people that you interacted with were basically in a domestic capacity. They were there to cook, clean, take care of the chores, whatever.
Yeah.
So when you came to work with black people, they're on the same professional level that you're on. Did you have any thoughts about the differences in these people that I grew up around all my life and these people that I'm now working with?
Well, that the two ladies, the lady that worked for mother and the lady that worked for my grandmother, they, we looked at them, they were like second mothers.
Like family.
Yes, they were like family. And I knew I'd better mind. And then when I started working with these ladies and we're talking like you and I are here, it was like, huh.
Did you find
maybe.
the conversation different?
Well, yeah, because it wasn't, get your hand off that pot, little girl. Or, did you make a mess in that room? If you made a mess, you better go clean it up. It was just,
well, since you've
and some of them were a lot older than me.
So you had to mind.
Yeah, well, the ladies I taught with.
Oh, I see.
See, and they had taught, one of them had taught in Hearn. This was like, she had been there almost 30 years, so she had seen it go full circle. And she would talk about how there was a house of prostitution 2 blocks from the school. And those kids knew whose mamas worked down there. And she would, a child would come in and say something, and I'd ask her, and, oh yeah, his mama's worked there for years. And I was like, everybody knows this. So it was.
Well, we all have ideas. We all have cultural differences. We all have ideas that we grow up with about each other's culture and where they come from, what they mean in terms of, because when I think about what you're talking about. You have people working for you, and in my case, that would have been my grandmother working in the home, because that's what she did as we were growing up. But when you met these other ladies and the principals and the other people that were working,
it was a whole different world. It was a whole different world. They, you could tell by talking to them that they were very educated, and their mannerisms were different. The way they spoke was different. It was just a whole world apart. They, it was, I had a lot of respect for both things. I knew how far I could go with the ladies that worked for mother. The lady worked for mother and the lady that worked for my grandmother. And I knew, well, we all did. My brother and I and my cousins, because it was nothing for the lady that worked for Grandma to have all of us by herself, all 8 of us. And so
Do you think
But-
your job experience in working with those ladies does it help you, the experience you had then? Does it help you now?
Yes.
And we, by working in the prison system now, teaching in the prison system, and with the prison system being predominantly black men,
Yeah.
and does it give you insight on how to handle your classes?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I'm sure those ladies gave you some. They
When the
how to
guys,
handle the kids in Hearn, which sometimes it's different.
yeah, well, I had never, ever heard of anybody getting spanked with an extension cord
Oh my.
until I got to her. And it was like, what do you mean your mother spanked you with an extension cord? Uh-huh. And now when the guys talk about that, I understand. I know where it's coming from. And they talk about their grandmothers. And I know the way their grandmothers are, you know, that I can hear the respect that they have for their grandmothers that maybe they don't have for their moms. There's a lot of them, there's a whole different world there. Their mothers were not mothers. They grew up with their grandmothers.
Do you think it's because maybe their mother's a little closer to them in age, you know, and a tendency, maybe.
My mother had me when she was 13 years old. I've had some, you know, my mother had me when she was 15. You know, and it's just their grandmothers raised them or an aunt raised them, and you can tell when they start talking about them. The love, the respect, it's there. They talk about their mama. It's not there. Now, there's a lot of them, yes, you know, they talk about their mothers and how much they love their mothers. And there's a big void of dads not being in the picture. A lot of those guys, I don't know my dad. My dad wasn't at home. Now, the ones that his dads were at home, I knew when my dad got home.
What do you notice? Is there a difference in the conversation with your white students and your Hispanic students than with your black students? Because I know we've been talking a lot, you know, about the differences and what you experienced when you left home and not being around black people and starting to be around black people. But now, when you work, you've got black, Hispanic, white, and sometimes there may be another in there that or Asian or someone that that's difficult to communicate with or something. So do you see a difference in that dynamic there?
I only have 2 whites right now, and they kind of sit to themselves. And when we do things, I pull them, make them, force them, you know, because, and it's not because they don't like them or anything. They're just super quiet. They don't know how to
Interact and what to say.
Right.
Now, do they try to migrate closer to you, like closer to your desk, or
Back
they try
in
to?
the corner, they stay back.
I can relate to that. I only have one white student in each of my classes, but I found that one student, he does what you're talking about. He gets to the back and he found someone that was closer to his skin color, closer to where he came from, and that's where he migrated to. I have one, he's in the mix, he's right up in the middle of everybody, he's boisterous, he's loud, he's into everything.
One of mine sits with Hispanics. They call themselves the tamale table. And he sits over with them. But I think it's because he lives on the same wing with some of those guys.
So does it make, have you found that, is it a difference in people that live in different areas that you have the same
Yeah.
likes, dislikes? I mean, look at the neighborhood that you live in. Is it a mixed neighborhood here?
You know,
I know you haven't been here long, so.
I I think we had a black lady move in over the Christmas holidays. She's not up when I leave, and when I come home, she's gone. So, and at this time of year, people don't see anybody.
Right.
But that's the only, I think she's down there. But,
Now,
this,
one more question. I'm going to leave you alone. But have you know the attitude, you think about attitude from when you were growing up and the people that you grew up with, the people you were around, you've had family in Louisiana, you've come through A&M, Hearn, and now you're in East Texas, in Palestine. Have you seen the attitude, any differences in the attitudes toward for people of color, white people versus people of color, or is it a difference that before you grew up at, or is it about the same, or?
well, Nederland now has black families in it.
Okay.
A&M
Of course.
has a lot of black students.
Mm-hmm.
God, please don't ever make me have to go back to her. And not because of the blacks. It was not a good area. Not at all. And then I lived in Dayton for 27 years, and it was very racially mixed. My children went to school with blacks. There were blacks in and out of our house all the time. And it wasn't, it was no big deal. Like I told you, my son refused to believe the little girl that was black in his class was black. He just, no, she's not. And I didn't argue with him. So, and I think the, the way things are between people now, it's you and I are together all the time. I eat with y'all every day.
Yeah.
And, but I don't think it has anything to do with, okay, I'm going to go eat with Felicia because Felicia's black.
Well, I'm going to ask you a hard question since you brought that up. That may seemingly be hard. Sometimes it's difficult to answer questions that, when it has to do with one race or the other. Do you think that our white colleagues treat you any differently because you eat with us every day?
Mm-hmm.
And when we say us, there's 3 other
Mm-hmm.
black ladies that we eat with every day, and then there's another white
Mm-hmm.
lady that comes in. So you think they treat you differently because
Mm-hmm.
you eat with us? So some of the
because I know how they were when I would go down and eat with them in the officers' dining room every day, and now that I don't go down there, and like when one day when you weren't there this week, and I went down to eat, and I walked up to the table, and they said, "Well, what do we owe this?" And I said, "They're having pork chops." That's what,
So, I mean, how do you handle when
I
ignore
them.
Okay.
They're not worth my time. I just ignore them because, I look at, they talk about everybody.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, people in general, even if it wasn't just our coworkers, but I mean, in general, people that there's always people that have snide remarks because I've experienced it. We live in a real world with real people, and I've experienced it on my end. Snide remarks. Do you think ignoring it is the best answer, or should we say we're not gonna entertain that?
I just, to me, they're not worth it.
The
I look at who they are, where they come from, and I just, you're not worth my time.
That's your opinion. That's not my opinion, and your opinion is not going to affect my opinion. So is
That's
that's
it.
basically, that's,
I don't see them, they're not, you know, and it's really, there's only two of them. And more one than the other, and you know who I'm talking about, so.
well, Ms. Boyd, thank you for your
You're
time.
welcome.
I appreciate you.
I hope
So-
I answered it right.
There were no right or wrong
Wrong.
answers. It was just what you thought and what you believe in. Thank you.